Let me just set the stage. It's Christmas time, 1975, and you're aboard a decrepit oil rig in the North Sea. And just like the Poseidon Adventure, or The Thing, or a mix of them, you know the very first moments something is dreadfully wrong. Here on the oil rig, because you can't seem to get your crap together on the mainland, you're an electrician. Barely, who isn't much beloved by those around him and doesn't seem that beloved by those he's left behind. Slowly begin to learn more about the rig and the North Sea and its consistent battle of attrition against one another as you move through the starting moments layer by layer, unfolding a bit more about the location and learning more about those around you. Until the whole rig becomes the location of a disaster movie as it's trashed by some massive malfunction and the normal becomes the downright weird. Think about it this way. Imagine a giant came in and kicked the shit out of your house and flipped it over. You couldn't even get out of your room without tripping over the door top and slipping in the water from that 20-gallon fish tank you thought was such a good idea when you were 19, let alone if half of it was on fire and the other half was covered in oil. That's some of what you experience in Still Wakes the Deep. Chinese Room, the developers, have made it clear they're working from a huge number of influences here and ideas from horror games and ocean-based horror movies. And that makes sense because it can be a terrifying place. Unless you're Jesus, you aren't walking on water. And the idea of sucking in the cold deep is almost as scary as the leviathans that these games and shows like to throw at you. And Still Wakes the Deep is the same thing. The dual evils of the ocean deep ready to kill you with a single mistake. And in this game, something huge and monstrous tearing at the innards of the station. Still Wakes the Deep tells the story of a Scottish oil rig worker, an electrician, during the cataclysmic time on board this main rig that performs like a Tesla pre-patched. It's leaking and creaking and speaking to the maintenance workers in consistent groans and metal fatigue, cracking in the very first couple minutes alone. And you get to explore that in the starting, which is a great touch. While yes, a walking sim is also notably a horror game in this instance, that does mean some QTEs, some light puzzle work, and a hefty amount of running and moving to escape, or at least delay the inevitable meat machine of underwater creatures from turning you into a bowel movement, or possibly worse than that, turning you into one of them. Walking simulators are a niche game if there ever was one, so be prepared. Built from the ground up for the experience of narrative storytelling, environmental immersion, and usually delivered with all the speed of a hangover-addled mind trying to figure out why it woke up still attached to that POS who tried to alcohol poison it the night before. Taking calls from panicked people, watching the same world crumble around you, reading bits of newspaper and paperwork that show just what people think of you are offset by small moments of sheer terror as you hide inside lockers, grates, and under tables from the evil within. Flashes of color and materials to indicate places to go, hide, or explore. Not really different from the pigeon shit you see in every Uncharted Edge, or the yellow paint in Horizon, or the runes in Ragnarok that some random kid must have painted on every rock, crevice, and cave in that game. But it helps here as it lets you explore and travel this topsy-turvy world compared to what you've known before, and it helps the player not get lost, or at least not too much. The same goes for the primary creature, or creatures in the game, whichever you want to swing it. A monstrous mix of the Thing and some Lovecraftian disaster. Hiding in a grate and watching this crazy blob of parts and goo moan like a 12-year-old being forced to wash the dishes, all the while chorting odd sounds and slopping around the room amoeba-like, is both frightening and almost instinctually wrong. So those initial steps through the mundane turning monstrous works well in the atmosphere here. And the creature, the investigation locations briefly seen here or there as the creatures interacting with the world is just as disturbing. I don't know why monsters are super interested in washing machines, but watching one try to close a door on one over and over and over again is somehow a brief glimpse into the mouth of madness. Though that probably makes sense to a creature that's more than 5 fathoms down usually, as washing clothes is the same as swimming around to them, so I guess it'd be confused too. The game looks for what it's doing fantastic. There's also a feeling of a location not made for man. Oil rigs are made to get oil, that's in their damn name, and so human luxuries are already at a minimum, and then traversing those spots chased by God knows what, the developers have done an excellent job making you feel like the familiar isn't that helpful. Performance-wise, the game has a number of settings as well as resolution scaling, which you may find you need as even the massive fog billowing around the structure doesn't necessarily always help it. Keep away from a couple dips here and there in performance. When it comes to the gameplay itself, this is a QTE-style game when it comes to the walking sim parts that have you do any kind of puzzle work. While interactions aren't at a premium here, sometimes you're going to have to Batman your way through some grates, working with a few tools you have to escape, whatever it is that you guys unlocked from the ocean floor. They do aim to hit it when it matters as you leap across the gap of a broken scaffolding and grab onto the last rung. Mistime it, and it results in you falling to your death. But it's the scientific exploration or movement through the intricately detailed underworkings of the oil rig that is so nice here. As it falls apart around you, it's fascinating for you to have this mix of a fear of falling and the danger of diving onto a ladder and missing that rung or not escaping the monster. Voice acting is also excellent here. It's a bunch of bravado-filled oil workers scared shitless. From Trotz to Roy to Kaz and more, the voice acting is on point. Hearing what can only be described as the world's longest death scene while you're slurping up oiled water because you're breaststroking through the bowels of an oil rig is awesome, and it's haunting and suitably filled with bits of terror, not the least of which is hearing the unmistakable sound of bodies hitting tanks and walls and ladders around you. Also, I don't know what alien underwater whale song sounds like, but I'm pretty sure the creatures in the game are singing it, and that's scary as shit when you're hunkered down under some crane wreckage listening to some creepy creature thunderfooted across the debris above you, calling to something else within the structure. Just excellent sound and vocal work. But the game itself and the fun factor that you get from it, despite its brevity, or in fact because of it, the game makes you care for those around you, especially at the start, because while there's small talk prior to the incident, it's not a great deal. You get little snippets of character detail from everybody. This both helps because other than one or two of the crew, you don't carry really any preconceived notions about who probably deserves getting chewed up by some demonic squid-beak creature that's ripping through the innards of the ship. But it also means you don't have those, and I would have loved a bit more time to have chatted with the crew beyond some pleasantries during evening meals or being threatened by some bald-headed turd with a glandular issue with a dull knife in the galley, or got even more flashbacks maybe from the previous times, or more locations to interact with and read about data about the different people on board. The camaraderie between you and the occasional character does hit hard though, because the writing is so damn good for the character interactions. Slang from that time and the character nationalities nails the feeling of a 1980s or 70s horror movie, when occasional moments where the characters aren't being chased or chewed into unrecognizable goo, you always have that last survivor in terror with another character somehow joking about something, and that occasional nervous break of nervous laughter. That's where the story and everything came together and still wakes the deep at its best as this experience. It's not fun in the way you would think of a lot of other games, and nor are these games almost ever that kind of situation. It's more of just experiencing that environment well within the fundamentals of being the character that they presented to you. However, just like the references the developers have used in their creation of the game, it has its own expected problems that go right in line with the form factor, and that's length and the fact that walking simulators, even at their most advanced, which this necessarily isn't, don't do anything to bring in new players. And replayability isn't at its highest for a game like this. Sure, you could miss that rung, or you could miss stopping a fire, or you could miss getting out of the way of a monster, but you're not necessarily getting an entirely different event in the story. Also, I wasn't really able to keep some characters alive regardless of my choices or which way I went, which most likely indicates a fairly linear story progression. However, for a Game Pass title where this is available, it is really worth checking out because despite my issues, the story and the characters and location were just something fun and new and then twisted on its side, almost shockingly well done. The feeling of older 1980s movies like Leviathan or Deep Star 6 with a mix of more recent movies like Underwater is easy to feel directly from the start, and there's a sense of unease and tension that builds up despite what this game's fundamental core mechanics are like. Listen, the game isn't going to change the world, but if you like your walking simulators and in addition can handle some horror and creepy antics, you could spend, a worse 6 hours. So I would say for me, it's definitely get on Game Pass. If you decide to buy it, well, that's up to you. But I would say definitely check it out if you get a chance. Absolutely well worth it. So that's it for me. Check out the more reviews and previews coming from the channel soon, as well as the Patreon podcast. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.